Well, hello everybody. This is Margaret and welcome to the Boboleros podcast. This is a podcast primarily about knitting, but also random drippings from the brain pan and influences from the world of the fine arts, classical music, travel, cinema, literature often do occur, but hopefully in a way that inspires you. So welcome to today's episode. And today's episode is focusing on the Dartmoor sweater, which is my recent finished object. I just cast it off 2 days ago. And it is part of the Dartalong, which is a knit-along. It started on the 1st of March and it continues until May 1st. And this is a knit-along for the Dartmoor sweater, which is designed by Caidree. It's a very beautiful, classic, elegant design, which has some also very cool designer features. And this knit-along, it is still continuing for another good 5 weeks. So if you haven't cast on yet, are interested in doing that with us, please do so. It's a knit along that I, Margaret, am co-hosting with Gina from Skin Cocaine and also Leslie Friend from A Friend to Knit With. So I am really surprised that by this sweater. In many ways. I'll show you, this is the back, but this is the front. And if you compare it to the sweater as shown in the photograph for the design, you'll notice that there's quite a few modifications. So I'd like to go over my experience knitting the Dartmoor. I know that on the knit along chain, a lot of people have mentioned that they were a little off gauge. I had an issue with gauge and I don't think it's the fault of the pattern at all. I definitely think it was my choice of yarn, and I'll go into detail about that. And then there were some modifications that I had to do out of necessity to salvage this knit. So it was a knit that tested me because last week, just when I split for the sleeves, I found this to be ginormous, like a wingspan. That was how wide it was. I think I'm okay with sizing. I might be actually way bigger than what the smallest calls for. I did my measuring and I feel like this is already quite a bit more oversized. However, I am embracing it. But again, I kind of pushed through. I had to resort to some crazy kind of maneuvers that I don't even know if they're legal in the knitting world, but I did them. I broke the rules just to salvage it. And to tell you the truth, I could not be more pleased with the results. Actually, it came out better than I even imagined. So don't you love it when knits do that? We have an idea, we have a pattern. Many times we want to achieve exactly what the pattern looks like. I know that I was that kind of knitter for most of my knitting life, which has been over 25 years now. And sticking to the pattern, and if I would get off pattern, if it started to look not like the pattern, I would say that I failed, or in my head I would think, wow, I've failed. But now I've taken on, for the last few years, a very different mentality. It's kind of like the mentality of Tim Gunn in Project Runway when he used to say, well, make it work. So I had to make it work. Let's start from the very beginning. I cast this on just when the knit along started, the first week of March, and it coincided with my travel to Paris. So I had already cast on right before I left, and the first cast on is for the I-cord. If you've never done a knit I-cord, and I for one have never actually started a knit this way with an I-cord. So this, although I-cord wasn't a new to me technique, definitely the I-cord detail in the back was a huge new thing for me. So I decided to cast it on with a contrasting color. I took a chance on that. I wasn't quite sure how it would come out, if it would integrate, if I would be able to pick up stitches along the seam and not have it look wonky, but the instructions were very clear how to do that so that the seam is very clean and has a beautiful edge. So let me show you the yarn I used for that I-cord, and this is from Madeline Tosh. It was stash yarn called Neon Peach, and I think this is probably hedgehog fiber, some remnants of something in a mohair silk. So I held those together and I did the cast on. I knit for the smallest size, and then you're told to pick up stitches along the I-cord edge, which is so clever. I absolutely love that technique. Again, really, I wasn't sure how it would all come together like a jigsaw puzzle, but it sure did come together really well. The yarn for the main body I used is this Wesley worsted, and this is by La Bien-Aimée. And it's just a wonderfully deep, rich blue color. It's called Amège, A-M-E-G-E, Amège, Amège. I always put an R in there, but it's Amège. And also I mixed it with my own hand-dyed Vivian mohair. This is in the black colorway, LBD. And this is the Vivian brushed mohair. This is a DK weight brushed mohair. One of the things, as you could see, it's got this halo. And this is one of my favorite features of this yarn. Should I have combined it, given that the gauge is for worsted weight, and I already had one single strand of worsted. In retrospect, it wasn't such a smart move because obviously I would be way off gauge. However, the mystery of this whole thing is that I made a gauge swatch and I decided to go down a needle size to size 8. And I made a gauge swatch with that, and the crazy thing is that I was on gauge. Like it's a 4-inch. You know, I cheated. I didn't do the full 4 inches vertically, but the width, which is the main thing that I always measure for, it was 4 inches. So I thought I was good to go. You know, just as a precaution, I did the size 8s, and I thought, okay, brilliant, let's move on. I was just knitting up a storm, knitting. And then probably when I got down to here, it's an interesting thing. You knit the left front, the right front, then the back, and then you join together, and at that point you split for sleeves. As I was doing all that, I noticed I was quite wide. However, I did not understand why I was, and I figured it would all somehow figure its way out. And to be honest, I recently have embracing the oversized look, which is a little bit of, I would say, a departure for me. I have been prone to knit more fitted sweaters recently. However, I don't know, I just felt the vibe to go with a more oversized fit. And so since this was becoming so oversized, I said, wow, let me just see what happens here. But it quickly got beyond oversized. And it was really funny because last week I had the pleasure to be at Forever Yarn, and they were having the yarn crawl, which was a super huge success. thanking everybody who came out, and I showed Yen because Yen was the original inspiration for us, Leslie, Gina, myself, all wanting to knit. What she was wearing at Cake Palooza, and she was wearing the Dartmoor but as a vest without sleeves, and so it looked so chic and fantastic. She had it in this hot pink, so that's why we all rushed over and we bought the Wesley at her booth. Anyhow, I said to Yen, I'm like, look at this is my Dartmoor, and she was like, that's big. I said, yeah, is that normal? And you know, it was not normal. It was not normal. So here I am. I'm thinking, what do I do with this? I already had split for sleeves, and this thing was a tent. I mean, it was a house. To quote Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's, when she's knitting, and she's like, I'm knitting a house. I was knitting a house, and I didn't know what to do. So I had a few options. Number one, I right away changed my needle size. So I went down to a 7. Okay, so now I'm on a 7, but it's not really making a dent. I mean, when I say I was about at 180 stitches, and this thing was just very big. And I realized that I would have to take that down almost 50%. Almost 50%. And yet how to do it, because I was already here, and the width was, if you can imagine, it was at least like this big. You know, it was really, really big. It's hard to imagine because you see this narrow part here, but it was radically big. Anyhow, I started to strategize my decreases, and I thought, and I've done this in the past, full disclosure, it's not a great thing to do because it leaves holes and they're noticeable. But my saving grace for this knit was actually using the Vivian brushed mohair. I don't say it because it's my yarn, but I say it because it conceals a variety of problems. There is something about the diffused nature of this yarn that if you fudge something, if you make a mistake, if you do a lot of decreases and now you have holes or whatever is the issue, this is to a knit what concealer is to dark eye circles, what the damper petal is to piano. It is what a fantastic watercolor wash is to a painting or a wall, or I don't even know enough analogies for this, but it just conceals and it diffuses the effect, and it causes this halo which sort of overlays over any problem. And if it wasn't for the mohair, I would not be able to get away with this. I know this for a fact, but this is what I decided to do. I decided to put a stitch marker right under the armhole, right here, because this is the spot in a knit where nobody sees stuff, because I mean, if they're looking, but it's sort of concealed area. So I put a stitch marker here and a stitch marker on the other side of the armpit. I hate saying that. Anyway, I did that, and then I started doing several rounds where I would get to my stitch marker at the armhole and I would knit 2 together 5 times in a row. So it was like knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 2 together. And it would cause this kind of tapering in effect here. Then I would do it on the other side. So I was taking in 10 stitches at each of those moments. And I started to get a little nervous because I did this 8 rows consecutively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, until I got this knit down from 180 stitches down to 100. So it was rapid, intense, I'm going to say aggressive decreasing that I had to do. And again, this is just to save the knit. It was emergency circumstances call for emergency measures. It was one of those things that I said, I have no idea if this is going to work or not. I know you're not supposed to decrease that much and in that same spot time and time again consecutively over the, a consecutive number of rows. But I think I was saved because of the yarn. Let me show you underneath. Like, here's where those decreases happened. Right in this area here. Sorry. Like right here. And you can't really see any issues, right? Like, it's not that noticeable. So I'm amazed. I'll show you here as well. Oh, in the light. Sorry. Underneath the armhole. That's where all of the decreases happen. Nothing happened in the front and nothing happened in the back. Well, I kept trying on the garment. Thankfully, I was knitting on 40-inch cables, so I just kept trying on to make sure I didn't go too narrow, because that could also happen. And luckily, I caught it just in time, and I realized, okay, this would be my continuing width until the end. So I just stayed at 100 stitches for several more inches, and then I decided to do a ribbing. And I don't know if this is in the pattern. At this point, after I did my decreases, I said, let me just wing it now. Let me just get to the finish line, because I was a little bit nervous. I was schwitzing. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is going to work out. I did about 10 rows. I remember, no, was it 10 rows? I think it was about 10 rows, about 2 inches of 1 by 1 rib. I stayed on my 7 needles, and then I decided to do a straight up cast off, whatever that one is called, long tail cast off. But I did switch to size 10 needles just because as you know, if you've been listening, I always make that mistake where I bind off too tightly, and then it's a bear to undo a tight bind off, especially with mohair. No thanks. So I just did it on a 10 and it worked out just great. Let's talk about the neckline, because you have your neck stitches on a holder and you're knitting the body, and the idea is you come back at the end to do your neck. Well, once I started decreasing, I needed to see how this garment would look put together. I really needed to have an idea of how long I should go with the body, and I couldn't tell because the neckline was rather drapey and it didn't give me any idea of the finished product. So I decided to pause my body knitting and take my needles and start on the collar. So I did that exactly to pattern. I think I picked up probably a few more stitches than what was called for. I had a problem. And I don't know why I did this. The first time I cast off, I got this really unsightly ridge. I don't know what I did wrong, but I have noticed that I do this. I've done this before. I mean, I fixed it, but I've done this before with loopy mango patterns, and I think it has to do, and if anybody knows the answer to this, please let me know. I think maybe I was doing the wrong, I was maybe knitting the opposite way that I should and picking up the opposite way or something of that nature, because I had this horrific like indentation, and so it looked so bad that after I already was a couple of rows into my knitting ribbing, and I thought maybe I could cheat that and conceal it somehow, but then I said no, it's just too gruesome. So I ripped back and I restarted the pickup. So the pickup was a bit of a bear. So I don't know if it's just me, but be careful when you pick up. I don't know what I did the second time around. I was a little bit more careful, I think. I noticed that when you pick up, or when I was picking up, it made a difference which stitches I picked up. For instance, the very edge stitching where the body was, I wanted to avoid those stitches on the very top. I noticed that that would then cause holes or would cause some sort of ridge to develop. So I usually picked up on the row below the very top. And I noticed that that blended more seamlessly. Again, I'm doing this using this mohair, which is, again, diffusing everything. However, I noticed that I had to be way more careful in picking up after I had restarted that. So I picked up, and then I did the required, whatever the pattern said, I think. No, actually, I remember now. I tried it on, and I said, you know, where do I want the neckline to hit? I decided to go a little bit below the neck. Normally, I go like this because I like things to hit right at the nape of the neck. But for this knit, I thought it's just nice, a little bit more. I wouldn't call this slouchy, but for me that was a little more slouchy. And then I did the bind off. I used a tubular bind off for the collar, thinking it's going to really be important to have that finished look. I probably didn't need to do that for two reasons. Number one, again, the mohair would totally cover up that, so it would look beautiful anyway, because even like here you see on the bottom I have my cast off and it looks really clean. So I didn't need to do that because the fabric is anyway very textured. So that was number one. Number two was that I decided to go in with the contrast color and do a single crochet chain around. I am still on the fence. And if you have an opinion on this, please weigh in. I don't know whether to keep the color contrast. I like how it kind of harmonizes with the back. Otherwise, the back would be the only moment with the orange. So for that reason, I did it. However, I am also partial to doing this just all black and then having that, you know, just that back moment, you know, like, woo. It's almost like wearing a skirt with a slit where you don't even see it until the back. All right, so that was my experience with the knit. Let's talk about blocking. With this kind of brushed mohair, I am not a fan of blocking. I have never tried to wet block completely anything in a brushed mohair. I am worried that it would take all that halo and kind of dampen it. I don't know. I'm worried about losing the halo. However, what I did do was I did take an iron and I steamed, like I put a little linen or muslin cloth on top. I had my iron on very hot setting with steam, and then I had to go over with an iron just the ribbing because it was kind of like bunching out, so I wanted it to lie flat, and so I just steamed with the iron this part and a little bit here also, the collar. If you've had experience wet blocking brushed mohair, I'd love to know in the comments, what was your experience with it? I don't have the courage to do it. I'll tell you honestly, I don't have the courage. Let's talk about the shape of this garment. As you can see, now that it has this decreased here, and I'm going to raise it up, it has a bit of a cocoon, a nice shape, and I think this is because of the decreases down at the armhole. So it came out very interesting, the fit. I don't have a garment quite like this. It's nice the way the sleeves kind of billow out, and I'm going to put some videos of me wearing it now so you could just see the look of it. In terms of styling, I see this sweater as being just such a fantastic go-to sweater for anything. With jeans, for a night out, with black trousers. I did a styling video with black trousers on Instagram the other day, and it just is like really fun. I also think it would look great layered over a blouse. I'm waiting for a white silk blouse to come in, and it's got this tie, and so I think it would be so cute to have the white blouse underneath with that little, you know, tie in the front, and that will give it like another dimension. And let me see what else. Striped, you know, kind of long sleeve tee. You can do that. I mean, I think just a myriad of options to style this. I am happy that I did the vest version. It's really more of a short sleeve kimono, short sleeve type of thing. I really love this effect, how you've got this excess fabric here that, again, because of that kind of shaping, it's this pillowy feeling here, and then it gets narrow. I've always wanted to make a sweater like that. So I feel like I've had my light bulb moment by accident where, you know, just doing something as an emergency, decreasing in one area of the sweater, I've realized that, wow, it pulls the fabric in an interesting way and causes this billowing effect. So I love how knitting, and especially when we have quote unquote mistakes in our knitting, how it leads us to different solutions, and it shows different options and different possibilities. I think it's so nice to keep an open mind when you knit. It's so easy to become, oh gosh, I don't know what the word is, just very into the pattern and not into how it looks on you. And I think that's the priority, is how it looks on you, how it makes you feel, how do you feel in the knit. That is so key and so important. And I always think that a pattern is simply a suggestion. And once you take that ball of yarn into your hands and the needles, there is almost that abandon that happens where we don't know where the road will take us. It's an adventure. It really is a grand adventure if we allow it to be that. If, you know, we are sticking so much to the pattern that if there's one mistake, we just can't live with it, and we just keep ripping back, and, you know, it becomes almost terrorizing. And I know this because I would knit that way. If I would make a mistake somewhere in the pattern, even if it wasn't noticeable years ago, I just couldn't live with that, knowing that I made a mistake. And it was so odd because it wasn't that anybody would know, but I knew. And I felt like it was just such a pharisaical approach to knitting. And I had no joy. Actually, like, people, if they saw me knitting, they were like, wow, that looks so stressful, because I'd be crinkled up, you know, my whole body had tension, and I was like, oh, you know. So it did not look at all relaxing. So that is really my experience with the Dartmoor. I want to say one last thing in terms of fabric. Fabric, I think, for me, is the number one thing. That's why I started Boboleros. I was intrigued by different yarn combinations and needle sizes, and finding golden opportunities and finding matches that maybe don't necessarily work, but that they're actually at the end do create something fresh and new. Technically, a worsted plus a DK, I think this takes me more into the category of super bulky in terms of weight, which is way more than what the pattern specifies, hence the enormity of the garment. However, stepping down to a size 7 needle, it was comfortable actually, even given the thickness of the two yarns together. It actually felt very comfortable to knit with 7s, which is, again, that's usually a DK. One is usually knitting DK weights with size 6s, not super bulky. But again, here's where breaking out of the mold, the traditional mindset, leads to unexpected and often thrilling results. I am so thrilled by this fabric, and I wish you could feel it. It is dreamy. It is so soft, and yet it's light, and yet it's thick. It's really hard to explain why it has that nature, but it just does. And it's just delightful in every way. So I just encourage you, before ripping out, especially since I was on the verge of having to rip out, before ripping out, perhaps there is a way to make it work. Sometimes in a pinch, like, do we really want to say goodbye to all those hours that we spent on something? You know, perhaps it'll lead us to something even better than what we imagined. So it doesn't always work out. I can't say that in my case. I've made so many mistakes in my knitting life, and I'm continually making even more mistakes. Like, I'm always making mistakes, but I'm always learning too, which is the whole reason for the mistakes. But I encourage you to knit the Dartmoor and to make it work, even in those situations it's not working. And I'd love to hear how your sweater is coming along, and what colors, what yarn choices you're using. I hope this has inspired you in case you're over your gauge and finding it to be larger than expected. Perhaps this little trick of decreasing under the arms might be of some value. Or, you know, if you are finding yourself getting a fabric that maybe is not exactly what you have in mind and you don't feel like ripping back, perhaps adding a stripe in a different kind of yarn, a different texture might be interesting. I did that for a sweater recently. It was just very straightforward sweater, just a raglan, and I just decided to, instead of keep going with just the pink, I said, what would happen if I put a big panel of yellow? So I had this neon yellow mohair in my stash, and I just did a massive stripe in yellow. And that's actually my favorite part of the sweater now. It just was making it more fun. So yeah, so there are always options, I think, but we have to kind of like allow ourselves the grace to say, this isn't quite what I had in mind. It's not the direction I thought I'd be going, but I sure am open to where this knit is taking me. So with that, I wish you happy knitting, and I'll see you really soon. And if you haven't joined the Dartalong, please do so. We have over a month to knit this, and if you knit it without sleeves, goodness, it takes no time. So please join us, #Dartalong. We have a Ravelry page as well, and I'll put the links down below. So happy knitting. Bye.